Hello friends, today I will talk about an adventure, fiction and novel movie, The Call of the Wild. A huge, calm Saint Bernard named Buck resides in 19th century California. In Santa Clara, he serves as Judge Miller's, Bradley Whitford, pet. Buck is a beloved but troublesome dog that frequently causes mischief. The criminals who want to earn a big payday off of enormous dogs needed for sleds for the Yukon Gold Rush kidnap Buck one night. He gets transported up to the Yukon's frigid north. When Buck disobeys throughout the cruise, a crew member beats him with a club. Buck starts to fear the club after experiencing mistreatment for the first time. As soon as Buck reaches the north, he starts sprinting through the community. A senior guy running from people and his past named John Thornton, Harrison Ford, crosses his path. Buck picks up John's harmonica and hands it back to him. John gives Buck a thank you before getting on a ship to travel further north. A Yukon mailman named Perot, Omar Sy, bids on Buck at an auction block. Working alongside his helper Francoise, Cara G, and their pack leader Spitz-led dog sled team is Perot. Perot has never done it before, but he intends to make the exhausting journey to the postal depot before the deadline. Buck struggles at first to learn how to be a sled dog, but he eventually earns Perot's and the other dogs' love and confidence. The black wolf that Buck starts to see in his ancestral spiritual visions seem to always be directing him on his journeys. Spitz eventually fights Buck to establish his supremacy after Buck irritates him with his sympathy and selfishness. The much bigger Buck is initially defeated by Spitz, but the Saint Bernard gets back up and handily defeats Spitz. Spitz is replaced as pack leader by Buck, and Buck vanishes into the wilderness. Perot makes Buck drive the sled the following day. Francoise is saved by Buck when she falls through the ice and he successfully guides the group through a perilous avalanche. Perot is ultimately able to reach in time to deposit the mail thanks to Buck's power and quickness. When John shows up at the postal depot to have a letter delivered to his ex-wife on the anniversary of their son's passing, Buck runs into him once more there. For several more trips, Perot makes his deliveries on time, but eventually the mail route is abandoned since the telegraph has taken its place. When Perot is compelled to sell the dog sled team, Buck and his pack are left without a guardian. A wealthy, narcissistic guy named Hal, Dan Stevens, who is traveling with his sister Mercedes, Karen Gillan, and her husband Dawson, buys Buck and his pack, Scott McDonald. Hal has acquired a deed to a Wildcat Gold plot but has never used a dog sled. Hal attempts to travel into the Yukon while loading the sled. When John arrives, he advises him not to proceed because of the weather change and their inexperience. Hal, who is conceited, decides to go since he thinks John is deliberately misleading them to get to the gold first. The following morning, John awakens, and his conscience prompts him to go looking for Buck. Hal is attempting to push the worn-out sled team across a melting river when he finally catches up to them. Hal threatens Buck with the club but he remains still as he lies asleep on the ground. When John arrives, he releases Buck from the team. He warns Hal that the dog team will perish if he continues to push them. John warns Hal not to go, but Hal persists. Buck is driven to John's cottage. At John's cottage, Buck heals. When John visits the neighborhood saloon one evening, a wild Hal who has just returned from the Yukon attacks him. Hal is left alone after the dog team left his sister and brother-in-law dead. Before Buck steps in and attacks Hal, Hal accuses John and brutally beats him. Hal is expelled from the tavern after the locals at the bar step in, confiscate his gun, and interfere. The following day, Buck and John make the decision to travel to the uncharted regions of the Yukon. They think they can survive unhindered in the wild. They live in an abandoned cottage they discover in a wide valley. Hal, meanwhile, breaks into John's old cabin to exact retribution. In the belief that John is keeping gold hidden, he locates John's map and sets out to find them. John and Buck discover the independence they are each looking for in the wilderness. They hunt for gold while fishing. John unearths a ton of gold. In the meantime, Buck meets a female white wolf and develops feelings for her. He alternates between John's cabin and the pack of white wolves. Between his domesticated life with John and his position in the wolf pack, Buck struggles. Finally, John decides that he is prepared to return home and informs Buck that he will depart in the morning. Buck is told by John that he must decide whether to stay or follow him back to civilization. Buck returns to the woods and spends the night with the white wolf. Hal visits the cottage that evening and assaults John. John gets shot during the scuffle and loses his life. Hal is pushed into the burning cabin by Buck when he returns and confronts him. Hal is slain. John and Buck are both on the ground. He gestures for John to stand up and puts a map and a harmonica in his direction, suggesting that he is prepared to travel back to civilization with John. Knowing that he is passing away, John hugs Buck and tells him that he is safe and at home. Then John passes away. Buck returns to the wilderness the following morning. He has a wolf and St. Bernard puppy litter after mating with the white wolf. He takes charge of the pack and totally responds to the call of the wild.